The first thing they teach you is that evidence tells a story. The second thing, the one you learn on the street, is that evidence doesn't have a goddamn opinion. It just is. A shell casing doesn't get scared. A blood spatter pattern doesn't regret its choices. It's the silent, unchanging truth in a world full of liars. For 30 years, I built my career on that single, solid fact. Then, I met a piece of evidence that broke the rule. A small, carved wooden bird that started to weep blood in the dead quiet of an evidence locker. It wasn't telling a story. It was still living one. And it wanted out. This one, the one that made me trade my badge for a pension 10 years early, didn't start in a firefight or a drug bust. It started, as these things so often do, with something utterly mundane, a wellness check. Case file HC 734, November 12, 2015. Dispatch sends me and Miller out to 1412 Hemlock Lane, edge of town where the woods start getting serious. The complainant was a nosy neighbor, hadn't seen Silas Croft in over a week. Mail piling up, lights off. The usual. Harmony Creek, Pennsylvania, is a town that's good at dying slowly. The mills closed 30 years ago, and we've been bleeding out ever since. The sky is the color of old dishwater, and the houses sag with a kind of communal exhaustion. Silas Croft's place was the final word in that sentence. It was a tired saltbox house being slowly swallowed by a forest that didn't know its place. "Probably took a fall," I said to Miller as we pulled up. The cruiser's tires crunched on a driveway that was more moss than gravel. Miller was young then. Still had that flicker of belief that police work was about justice, not just paperwork and managing decline. "Maybe," he said, his gaze fixed on the house. "Place gives me the creeps." "Every place gives you the creeps, kid." I was already out of the car, my breath plumbing in the cold, damp air. 30 years on the force in Harmony Creek teaches you to be economical with your emotions. Creepy was just a setting on the thermostat. No answer at the door. We followed procedure, checked the windows, shouted his name, the whole dance. Finally, I put my shoulder into the front door. The lock splintered with a pathetic crack. The air that rolled out wasn't the smell of decomposition. It was just still. It was the sterile, dusty scent of a place where time had stopped. No sign of forced entry, other than our own. No struggle. Just layers of dust and the quiet oppression of a life lived in isolation. We found him at the bottom of the basement stairs. Silas Croft, 70-something, local eccentric. He was a DOA, no question. Limbs at angles they shouldn't be. For a moment, it was exactly what I'd predicted. An old man, a steep staircase, a bad landing, open and shut. I knelt down, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. My training kicked in, a checklist running through my head. Then the first detail pinged, the first thing that didn't fit. "No blood," Miller said from the top of the stairs, his voice echoing slightly. He was right. For a fall that had clearly involved significant trauma, the scene was clean, clinically so. The concrete floor beneath Croft's head was unstained. I made a note. Shock can do funny things, I told myself. Internal bleeding. The coroner would figure it out. But my eyes were drawn to his hand. His right hand was clenched into a tight, waxy fist. Pried into that rigor mortis grip was a small object. I put on a pair of gloves and carefully worked his fingers open. It took more force than I was comfortable with. Lying in my palm was a bird. It was carved from some dark, reddish wood, polished so smooth it felt like stone. The detail was incredible. Every feather etched, the head cocked as if listening. It was heavy for its size, dense, and for a split second I would have sworn it was warm against my gloved hand. A trick of my own body heat, I reasoned. "What is it?" Miller asked. "Looks like a whittling project," I said, dropping it into an evidence bag. Item number 1. We tagged it, logged it. HC734A. A. I sealed the bag, the little wooden bird staring out through the plastic, with its unblinking, carved eyes. The coroner's team arrived, zipped Silas up, and carted him away. We finished processing the scene and drove back to the station under a sky that had finally decided to spit a cold, miserable drizzle. Case closed, I thought. Just another sad, lonely ending in a town full of them. I've never been more wrong in my life. The station at night has its own kind of quiet, not a peaceful quiet, but a waiting one. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the squad room is the only sound, a constant, low-grade buzz that gets into your bones. I was at my desk, typing up the incident report for HC 734. It was late, almost 2 a.m. Miller had gone home hours ago. I was just tying up the loose ends. I needed to double-check the evidence tag on the bird. The evidence locker is in the back, a small, climate-controlled room that always smells of stale paper and gun oil. I unlocked the door, the click of the tumbler unnaturally loud in the silence. I found the bin for HC 734 and pulled out the sealed plastic bag containing the bird. That's when I saw the smear on the inside of the clear plastic. My first thought, the cops thought, was contamination. My glove must have had something on it. But I'm meticulous. Chain of custody is everything. I took the bag back to my desk, placing it directly under the harsh glare of my lamp. The smear was dark red, almost black, and it looked wet. As I stared, my tired brain trying to formulate a rational explanation, another bead of the same fluid oozed from the grain of the wooden bird's wing. It swelled, glistening for a moment like a ruby, before rolling slowly down the smooth surface to join the smear. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned closer. There was no sound, just this impossible, silent weeping. I got a faint smell, not precisely blood, but something related. It was coppery, yes, but with an undertone of damp earth, of something fungal and ancient. This can't be happening. My mind, a place of procedure and regulation, of cause and effect, rebelled. It's sap. The wood is uncured. It's a chemical reaction with the plastic. I offered myself a dozen logical exits, and not one of them felt true. Driven by an instinct I didn't understand, I took a pen and carefully nudged the bag. The fluid was thick, slow-moving. It was blood. Or something so close to it, the distinction didn't matter. I felt a cold dread, a feeling wholly separate from the dangers of the job. This was a violation of a different kind of law. I unsealed the bag. A cardinal sin, breaking chain of custody without witness or reason. My hands were shaking. I took a sterile wipe from my go bag and cleaned the inside of the bag and the surface of the bird until they were spotless. I resealed it, put it back in the locker, and locked the door. I walked out of the station without finishing my report and drove home. The image of that single, red tear burned into my mind. I didn't sleep. The next day, I avoided the evidence locker like it was radioactive. I tried to focus on other cases, but my mind kept drifting back. Around noon, I got the preliminary report from the coroner. I read it once, then twice. It didn't make any sense. Cause of death was listed as, quote, massive internal hemorrhaging and exsanguination. Silas Croft had bled to death. But the addendum stated, in cold, clinical text, that there was a near-total absence of blood in the vascular system, and no significant blood evidence located at the scene. He had been bled dry from the inside out. The report was a medical impossibility, a paradox dressed up in professional jargon. That was it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. With a knot of ice in my stomach, I went back to the locker. I pulled out the bag. A small, dark puddle had formed at the bottom. The bird was slick with the stuff, its polished surface gleaming wetly under the fluorescent lights. It was no longer weeping. It was bleeding. I started digging into Silas Croft, covertly at first. I told myself it was just closing the loop on the coroner's baffling report. I spent hours in the town hall's musty archives, poring over property deeds and family records. The Crofts weren't just any family. They were one of the founding lines of Harmony Creek. Their deed for the land on Hemlock Lane went back to the original charter in the 1790s. And they'd always been keepers of that specific patch of woods. Miller caught me one night staring at the evidence bag on my desk. The puddle was bigger now. "Sarge, you okay?" he asked, his voice hesitant. He'd seen the coroner's report. He knew the case was weird. I didn't have the energy to lie anymore. I just pointed at the bag. "Look." He stepped closer, peered at the bag, and then his face went pale. He wasn't looking at it with a cop's eye. He was looking at it with the eyes of someone who'd grown up in Harmony Creek, who'd heard the stories the adults whispered when they thought the kids weren't listening. "My grandmother," he started, his voice barely audible over the station's hum. "She used to tell us stories, not to scare us, more like warnings. She said this town was built on sour ground, that there was a massacre here, way back before the town was even a thought, a land deal gone bad with the natives, or maybe something between settlers. The details were always vague. But she said the violence soaked into the soil, made it hungry." I stared at him, my cynical procedural world crumbling. "Hungry for what, Miller?" "Blood," he said, his eyes still locked on the weeping bird. "She said the founding families made a kind of pact, an understanding, that every so often the land needed to be fed, to keep the town from completely falling apart, to keep the hunger at bay. The Crofts were always the caretakers." The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. Silas wasn't a victim of a fall. He was an offering. And his strange, meticulous woodworking, it wasn't a hobby. It was a ritual. That bird wasn't just a piece of wood. It was a vessel, a sponge. The storm that broke over Harmony Creek that night felt biblical. Rain lashed against the station windows, and the wind howled like something in mourning. Miller and I were in the evidence room, the two of us drawn there by a shared, unspoken dread. The bird was no longer just bleeding. The dark, viscous fluid was flowing from it in a steady, silent stream, pooling on the metal shelf and dripping onto the concrete floor with a sound like a faulty tap. Drip. Drip, drip. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging us into near-total darkness, relieved only by the emergency exit sign at the end of the hall, casting a sickly green glow. In that sudden silence, the dripping sounded like a drumbeat. The air in the small room grew impossibly cold, heavy, with a pressure that pushed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The smell of copper and damp earth was overwhelming, thick enough to taste. And then I saw it. The blood on the floor wasn't just a puddle. In the faint green light, it was moving, shifting. It coalesced not into a random shape, but into images. Fleeting, nightmarish tableaus formed and dissolved in the dark fluid. I saw grasping roots made of shadow. I saw the floorboards of Silas Croft's basement twisting like living things. I saw him not falling, but being pulled down, his body dissolving into the darkness, his life being drawn out of him by the house itself, by the very ground it stood on. I wasn't just seeing a murder, I was seeing a feeding. The bird on the shelf seemed to pulse with a dark light only I could see. I understood then with a soul-crushing certainty. It was a conduit, a link. It held the last moments of Silas Croft, and through it, the entity, the hunger of the land, was aware of us. It knew we were watching. I felt its attention on me, an ancient, malevolent consciousness, vast and patient, and utterly without mercy. It was turning its gaze from its meal to the insects who had stumbled upon the carcass. My training, my 30 years of procedure and protocol, evaporated. There was no perp to cuff, no rights to be read. My service weapon felt like a child's toy. This was a force of nature, a geological horror. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. "We have to get it out of here," I choked out, my voice sounding thin and reedy. "Sarge, what are you doing?" Miller yelled as I lunged for the shelf. I grabbed the bird. It was slick and horribly warm, like holding a living, bleeding organ. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over me. The whispers started in my head. Not words, but feelings. A crushing loneliness, a terrifying emptiness, the sensation of being drained. Silas's last moments. I ran. I bolted from the evidence room, through the darkened station, and out into the screaming storm. Miller was right behind me, shouting my name, but I didn't stop. I threw the bird onto the passenger seat of my cruiser and peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing on the wet asphalt. I didn't know where I was going, but my body did. I was being guided by a pure, animal instinct for survival. The wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge as I sped towards Hemlock Lane. I drove past Silas's dark, silent house and onto the muddy track that led into the woods behind it. The headlights cut a frantic path through the thrashing trees. Finally, the cruiser bogged down in the mud. I killed the engine, grabbed the bird, and got out. The forest was alive with the storm, but beneath the noise there was a profound and terrible silence. I knew this place. This was the grove Miller's grandmother had talked about. The trees were ancient, gnarled things, their branches twisted into agonized shapes against the lightning-lit sky. They didn't look like they grew from the ground so much as they were holding it down. I found the oldest one, a behemoth with a trunk like a stone column. At its base, the earth was dark and bare. I fell to my knees and began to dig with my bare hands. The soil was soft, unnaturally so, yielding like flesh. It didn't feel like I was digging a hole. It felt like I was opening a wound. My fingers were raw and bleeding, but I didn't stop until I had a shallow pit. I held the bird over it. It was still bleeding, the warm fluid running over my shaking hands. For a second I hesitated. This was evidence. This was a life. Then I looked into the suffocating darkness of the trees, felt the ancient hunger of this place, and I knew this was the only way. I dropped it in the hole. The moment the bird was covered with soil, everything stopped. The wind died down to a whisper. The oppressive pressure in the air vanished. The rain softened to a drizzle. The forest was just a forest again. The land, I realized with a shudder, that had nothing to do with the cold, was sated. I filed for early retirement the following week. The official report on Silas Croft's death was closed, filed away under undetermined causes. A bureaucratic shrug for a cosmological horror. I never told anyone the full story, not officially. Who would believe me? They'd have taken my badge and my pension and put me in a padded room. But I know what I saw. I carry it with me. That's the real horror of it. Not the bleeding bird, not the hungry ground. It's the knowledge. It's knowing that the world you thought was solid and rational has a basement, and in that basement, things are stirring. It's knowing that our laws, our procedures, our entire understanding of reality is just a thin crust of ice over a deep, dark, cold ocean. Harmony Creek is still dying, faster now, it seems. Businesses fail, families move away, houses sit empty. It's not just the economy. The sacrifices stopped, the pact is broken, and the town itself is being consumed, slowly, piece by piece. Some evidence isn't meant for a courtroom. Some things don't want a killer to be found. They just want to be fed. And this town is always hungry. Sleep well tonight, if you can. Subscribe to Professional Nightmares for more stories from those who've seen what lurks in the shadows of everyday jobs. Your next nightmare is just one click away.